everybody, what's up? It's Katie from HollabackPurl, and today we're going to talk about what in the world this thing is. This is called a hank. It is a hank of yarn. It is where you take a circle of yarn, hold each end, twist it, and then put it inside of itself, and it makes this kind of like pretzel-y, donut-y shape of delicious yarn. We're going to learn how to take this hank of yarn and turn it into a cake of yarn. A cake is much more manageable, less likely to become a tangled up mess. So let's begin. Everyone is wondering what type of yarn this is. This is from a brand called Malabrigo. I'm not quite sure if that's exactly how you say it, but I do know that it's fantastic yarn. This is the 695 Peachy Rios variety, and it is superwash merino wool. Super cute, and I have used this company for multiple yarns, different projects, and it has never failed me. All right, to get this hank of yarn into a large circle again, I'm going to put my hands on both sides and kind of grasp like as if there were two tubes of yarn. And I'm going to pull it apart, and look at that, it undid itself. So now I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to hold it up and kind of let it unravel a little bit. And I'm going to see where an opening is, and I can feel around this yarn, I can see where an opening is, I can put a finger in there and hold the yarn up in the air with one finger, and it kind of makes like a yarn necklace. Now a lot of you are like, oh my gosh, Katie, like I did this, I tried to use my Swift and it just becomes a tangled mess. What in the world do I do? This is where it all begins. If you hold up this yarn by your finger and observe the lengths of the yarn and make sure that none of them are all twisted up. Make sure that you have all the lengths exactly where they should be. Like if you look up here, so this bit is kind of twisted under itself. So I'm going to untwist that a little bit, make sure that everything is nice and in line with itself. And it looks like everything is good now. All right, let's move to a Swift. Today, our cake of yarn, we're going to use a Swift, and this is what a Swift looks like. This one is specifically from Knit Picks, and it has worked wonders for me. I absolutely love it. It's kind of like an umbrella. If you see, there is this kind of like key on the side here, and you can unscrew it, and that'll allow you to lift and lower your Swift to make it as wide as you would need for your yarn hank. Over across from my Swift on the other side of the table, I have a yarn ball winder. This one is from Amazon. I can put the link down in the comments section or in the description. And it wasn't very expensive. I think it was probably like 20 bucks or so. And it works fantastic. So Swift with the yarn ball winder, and life is really, really perfect. Alright, so now that we have untangled our hank of yarn and know that everything is in the right position and we are good to go, I'm just going to take one more minute to look it over. I have some like weird tangly things going on down here. So I'm just going to make sure everything is okay with that. Alright, looks good. I am now going to release my Swift a little bit, make sure it goes down. Alright, I am going to put the edge of the hank around the Swift and take my other hand and pull away from the Swift so that everything has tension on the Swift. I am then going to take my opposite hand and lift up on that bottom portion of the Swift, glide it up. Once my hank is secured in the right position, I'm going to tighten up my Swift. Now everything is up here, everything is great. But if you run your hand around the yarn, you're going to notice that there are these little bits of yarn holding the hank together. I'm going to have a handy dandy pair of scissors. I'm going to carefully cut that bit of yarn. Oftentimes this piece of yarn is a different color and different size than what is on the hank, so it makes it a lot easier to tell exactly what it is. Okay, I've got this bit of yarn, And this specific bit of yarn is actually tied to the hank. Usually it's not tied to the hank, but this one is. And that is because this is the start and finish portions of my yarn. So this is actually the beginning and the end of the yarn hank. So I'm going to cut this little knot off. And the beginning of my yarn hank is going to hang down so I know where I'm going to begin my winding of the yarn. I'm going to spin my Swift around until I find the next piece of yarn. I'm going to cut it and take that off my hank. All right, carefully as to not tangle up my hank yarn. Spin around again. There's usually about 4 or 5 of these bits of yarn, and they just secure my hank together. That's it. You don't need to save these bits of yarn or anything. You can get rid of them. Spinning around, spinning around. All right, everything looks like it is cut off. I now have the beginning of my yarn, and I'm going to put that in my yarn ball winder. If you come over to your yarn ball winder, let me move the camera so you can see my winder. So I'm going to put the end of my yarn, let me try to do this one-handed, into this holder here, and it actually kind of winds around so that the yarn comes through like that. I'm now going to take the yarn across to that top portion of the yarn winder, and I'm going to tuck my yarn into that little trench bit that you can feel at the top. So now my yarn is secured, and from there I can just crank it just like a jack-in-the-box, and you can go count. Sorry, it's going to come off. Kind of tricky with just one hand. All right, so now you can do, oh, hold on. Okay, so as you can see, I had put my yarn into the top of my yarn ball winder. The best way I feel like to start winding is I take my thumb or my finger and I hold down that piece of yarn that's in the top of the yarn ball winder and just steady it there until once I begin winding, the yarn wraps around it and holds it in place. So I'm going to continue running my yarn ball winder. I am cranking it in a clockwise manner, and as I go, my Swift is moving and the yarn is coming onto the winder and making a yarn cake. All right. Don't try to force your yarn. If it becomes stuck, you're going to want to stop what you're doing, make sure it's not tangled up. But because that very first step where we made sure that the yarn was all situated and not tangled up in the hank, that really, really helps. Just untwisting everything in the beginning will ensure that you're not going to get any hiccups as you run your yarn ball winder. Okay. This can take a while, but it's a lot of fun to watch, especially when your yarn has different colors, like speckles and stuff. It's really cool to see exactly what your cake's gonna look like. You can do this with any size of yarn. So if you have like a sock kind of yarn or maybe a little bit chunkier, doesn't matter, for as long as your yarn ball winder can hold a thicker yarn, you're good to go. I have used everything from a size 7 down to a size 1 on this specific yarn ball winder, and I've had absolutely no problems. The only problems I've ever had is if I didn't take the time to look over my hank when I undid it and the hank was twisted up a little bit, and that way when I put it on the Swift, because it had an extra twist in it, the Swift would always stop every once in a while. So you just make sure that that's untwisted perfectly and you are totally good to go. I've had this Swift now for about a year and a half, and it has been awesome. I have had absolutely no problems with it, and I will put the link to getting it from Knit Picks in the description below. So as you can see, my cake is getting larger and larger. I'm almost down. Oh, see, I had to stop. I have a little knot. Sometimes when you get to the end of your hank, there might be a little tangle in there. So I'm gonna just take the time to undo it with my fingers. It wasn't any big deal. So I'm just gonna take and keep an eye on this. Again, it tangled up a little bit. I'm just gonna keep my eye on this as we're working. And sometimes I like to keep my hand on the yarn, just like so. That way, if there's anything coming up that I can see, I can quickly hold the yarn with my hand. All right, everything's coming off nicely. We're almost there, just a few more strains, yarn bits. Come on, little yarn, you can do it. And a boop. So now in my hand I have the end of my yarn. So I'm gonna crank just until it's off. Let me move the camera so you can see. Oh, actually you can see pretty good. Let me move. Oh, perfect. Okay, so I have the end of my yarn here. I am going to wrap it. Let me turn this way so you can see a little better. I'm gonna wrap my yarn around the middle of my cake, and wherever it stops, when I get to the end, I can actually lift up a few strands on my cake and tuck this very last piece, this very end of the yarn underneath, and it'll stay. Perfect. Now let me move the camera for you. So this is what the top of my yarn looks like. This piece of yarn going across the top, that is the beginning point of your yarn. That is what you're going to start knitting or crocheting with. Now if I move my camera around to the side of the yarn and underneath it, we want to make sure there's no yarn underneath, because sometimes if you have too much yarn, it'll actually come underneath the winder, and so you'll want to just like grab those and bring them up to your cake. Everything looks good right now, so I'm going to take it off. Okay, I'm going to put my thumb on the top of the cake like this. I'm going to put my fingers underneath and grasp it, okay? And I'm going to push up and slide. If you can't see the beginning yarn bit, you can grab that, pull it out just to make sure you don't lose it, okay? Grab and pull off your winder, boop, and put it down. And there you go, you have your beautiful little cake. Perfect. So there you go, everybody. That is how you go from a yarn hank to a yarn cake. Have a beautiful day, and if you have any other questions, ideas, comments, just ask me. I'm always happy to help. Have fun!